A month ago, I went to a fighting game tournament down by the Canal District. The way the tournament works is that there are 4 games to sign up for, 2 regular games and a rotating game of the week, usually something that used to be popular but fell out of fashion. But then we have the mystery game. The mystery game is usually some sort of janky, obscure thing from the past, something like Super Gem Fighter or Osro Blade. And that week, I sat down and played Terrordrome, Rise of the Boogeyman. Terrordrome, Rise of the Boogeyman is a fighting game that focuses on one main factor: using characters from horror films and making them fight. There are characters like Candyman, Pinhead, Freddy Krueger, Jason Vorhees, as well as some more obscure characters like Herbert West from Reanimator and Matt Cordell from Maniac Cop. The game itself controls well enough. You have a punch, a kick, a weak weapon attack, and a strong weapon attack, as well as a taunt. There are grabs, assists, special moves, supers. It is a truly playable game. The tournament was single elimination, and I got knocked out. When I got home, I was able to go online and find it for free, released by the publishers. And I played it a bit more, and it got me thinking. That's the last proper horror-themed fighting game that I've played for a while. I feel like fighting games have always had little sub-niches. There is a hypothetical flowchart that will help you find out which fighting game is for you. 2D or 3D? How do you like your combos? And this applies to genres too. Do you like martial arts movies? Have fun weeding through every fighting game in existence. But what if you like fantasy? Battle Fantasia is a very good game. Do you want grounded realism? Play Virtua Fighter. What if you like Star Wars? Don't play Masters of Terrakazi, play Plasma Sword instead. My point is that there is a fighting game for everyone. The overall genre has moved on from only martial arts tournaments and now encompasses all sorts of aesthetics, gameplay features, and subcategories. But some genres get a bit underrepresented. I have played a lot, and I mean a lot, of fighting games. But I only ever think about a few at a time. And more often than not, I think about Mortal Kombat. Not because I want to, but because every game in the NetherRealm release has had at least one famous horror character in each game's roster. But up until recently, I didn't know that I could just play as Ghostface in Terrordrome for free, instead of having to shell out $60+ to play as him in Mortal Kombat 1. So, it leads me to ask, where is this intersection between two avenues that I love so dearly? Where is horror in fighting games?
Yeah, I've been waiting for this.
I want to do some honorable mentions first. I'm going to be focusing on a few big examples throughout the video, but there's a lot of smaller things that don't quite fit in the way that I want to, but still deserve to be shouted out. So let's get those out of the way. Samurai Showdown has 2 creepy characters. One is Basara, who is essentially a ghost, who aims to kill the man who killed his lover, only to find out he murdered her himself. The other is Kusaragedo, who is a massive yokai that went mad and ate his daughter when he was a human. He is the biggest character in any Sam Show game, and is also one of the worst characters in Sam Show 5, but his attacks are pretty gnarly and gruesome. King of Fighters has a character named Choi Bunj, who has finger knives and wears a striped green sweater along with a fedora. He's very blatantly inspired by Freddy Krueger. There's an indie fighting game known as the Black Heart, which is bloody, monstrous, and all-around steeped in gothic design. The characters are grotesque, the stages are nasty, and the music is incredible. Every bit of this game was done by one man, Andres Borji, and I applaud his work. Tekken 7 has Jeffrey Dean Morgan's portrayal of Negan from the Walking Dead TV series as a DLC guest character. His Rajar is a reference to his brutal dispatching of Glenn in Season 7. Soul Calibur features an undead pirate named Cervantes de Leon, the Dark Lord Nightmare, who is a brave knight now corrupted by the demonic sword Soul Edge, and this freaky guy named Voldo. I just think Voldo is freaky. Thrill Kill is a PS1 game about sinners in hell fighting to be resurrected. Notorious for being given an adults-only rating due to its content, it was cancelled back in the 90s, with prototype files being released online. I played it, it was bad, and OBS couldn't record any gameplay, so you get this clip from a Maximilian Dude video. Omen of Sorrow, developed by A1 Games, is inspired by horror, mythology, and literature. Featuring a cast of characters that run the gambit of monster hunters, angels, beasts, and more, the game received middling reception for its design choices, game feel, and graphics. but it's also gotten some praise for those same issues as a nice casual game, and regardless of what I've heard, I think it might be the closest thing to a horror-themed fighting game in a long while. Lastly, Castlevania Judgment for the Wii. Castlevania is a series inspired by horror of all kinds from all sources, and is one of my personal favorites. And with a sprawling epic told throughout the franchise of the battle between the Belmonts and the forces of Dracula, it makes sense that Konami would make a fighting game out of it. Unfortunately, Castlevania Judgment is just not all there. There's a lot I could complain about as a fighting game fan and as a Castlevania fan, but in regards to the horror element, the game doesn't feel caked in horror like other entries. It feels like a mask it wears as a way to show off how cool its edgier character designs are. Even the stage designs are lacking. Judgment feels less about horror and more about edge, so we're just going to push that to the side, sadly. And with that, we can finally get started, beginning with Guilty Gear is about stylish character designs, massive combos, and just being cool. I picked it up after hearing about it in a video, and it has become one of my favorite games of all time. But if you asked anyone what the series was about, they would say rock music. Almost all of the characters are references to bands or musicians, and if they aren't, one of their moves is. Even the soundtrack is drenched in rock music. In between this, though, there are some genuine horror themes. And I think part of that can be attributed to the influence of metal, with metal having a darker aesthetic than other subsets of rock at this time. And it pops out at you with certain elements. Zato 1 is a man who made a bargain for power with a parasitic creature called Forbidden Beast. Think the Venom symbiotes from Spider-Man. At the end of the first game, Zato dies and Eddie takes over his body for a few games, up until Zato is revived back in Exode. Abba is a homunculus who awoke in a lab. Her blood, if you could call it that, has mercury in it. Her outfit is made of random wrappings covered in blood, and her weapon/husband is a living demon axe named Paracelsus. They are very happy together. How dare you insinuate otherwise? Zappa is a man haunted and possessed by ghosts, and the funny thing is that he thinks he's just sick. He gets better in Exarch. Testament is a humanoid gear, which is basically an artificial race of creatures that were the next step in evolution. Testament has familiars, uses a scythe, has blood magic, and dresses like the Grim Reaper. Slayer is a vampire who believes in dandyism. That's all. I mean, his moveset is scary, but he's a bloodsucker. He's got a wife that can never die named Sharon, and he loves her, and he writes bad haikus with her. And this exhibits itself in the characters and their animations. Zato's gameplay archetype is the puppet fighter, so he uses Eddie to do most of his moves. Zappa's ghost plays status effects on characters and show up to actually do the attacks. Abba hits you with her husband. Testament uses blood magic in their attacks, and their supers are absolutely leaning into the horror of Testament as a character. This is one of their instant kills. Even Slayer has a move called Blood-Sucking Universe, where he drains your health after getting some sip, and then hits you for bigger damage. And their music also reflects their character designs and their personalities. You can tell that Slayer and Testament are refined. You can tell that Zato and Eddie are willing to kill for their vision. You can tell that Zappa is losing control of himself. And you can tell that Abba and Paracelsus are very happy with each other. Zato, Abba, Slayer, and Testament are in Guilty Gear Strive, the latest game. One of my favorites as well. And although it's a bit less on the eerie side, it's nice to see these creatures get a feature. But if I want to see something spooky, I'm always going to go back to Accent Core. Killer Instinct ripped off Mortal Kombat's atmosphere and Street Fighter's gameplay back in the day. Best of both worlds. But it has some spooky stuff of its own, no doubt about it. From even the first game, there was this dour tone, and that's really explored to max capacity in Killer Instinct 2013. If we take a look at the roster, we have ghosts, mummies, vampires, demons, a cyclops, a gargoyle, aliens, and the werewolf. This will not be the last werewolf in this video. The gameplay itself, not as creepy, at least not in an active sense, but the world around it? Okay, first of all, Killer Instinct is a visually dark game. Sure, it can be bright when it wants to be, but most of the time, you are playing in a night stage with a relatively muted shade palette. The art style is delightfully in the age of 2013, with characters having very uncomfortably visible veins, well-defined muscles, and faces that weren't uncanny to the point of utter eeriness. Attacks themselves weren't gruesome. What am I saying? You got blood knocked out of you every time you got hit. And the fact that combos were basically so easy to do that the game would hand even the easiest ones to you made it oddly beginner-friendly. Add in that this was back when gaming with friends was less about the online and more about just hanging out at someone's house. This was a great way to introduce the creepier characters as they came out. Let me bounce a few off of you. We already talked about Samurai Showdown briefly, but we sort of got a reminder of that in Hisako, a character who was released for Season 2 of the game's DLC. Her backstory involves her taking up her father's blade against bandits that raid her village, losing her life but inspiring the other village residents to successfully drive back the vagabonds. She's back in the game because the main antagonist of the franchise, Ultratech, big conglomerate, you know the kind, decides to disturb her site of rest. And her game start animation legitimately freaked my friend out. She's unapologetically inspired by Japanese legend, just like Sadako and Kayako before her. And her gameplay involves teleports, haunting shrieks, and a command grab where she possesses you. Mira is from Season 3, and the sister of another character in the game, Maya. The two were terrific secret agents, and on a mission gone wrong, Mira sacrificed herself to save her sister. Only to be found by the very vampires that were her target, and turned by them. She has an interesting mechanic where some attacks cause her to lose her life for the sake of bigger damage or movement options. Luckily, certain attacks allow her to get that health back. How about one more? Saberwolf is from the very first game and is a base roster mainstay. A man with lycanthropy, werewolfism. Conrad von Saberwolf has tried so many things in an effort not to give in to the beastly urges and return to normal. He's even gone to Ultratech for cybernetic implants. That didn't work, and now he's nursing a tragic addiction to arcane medicines due to the awful experience that the removal of those implants was. It was bad. And that's what Killer Instinct 2013 nails about horror. Because to a certain degree, horror movies are kind of tragedies. Some of these monsters weren't always monsters, they were people. They existed relatively unbothered by the world, and now they've become beasts. Creatures. Sure, a lot of the rest of the characters in the cast, I haven't mentioned they're just that, but everybody has a slight element of sorrow and tragedy to them. Even Spinal, the skeleton pirate. Killer Instinct nails the horror movie vibe, not just in its design, in its visuals, or in its gameplay, but in its feeling. Its feeling is sorrow. Let's talk about Mortal Kombat. I don't enjoy Mortal Kombat, but I recognize that Mortal Kombat has the vibes. It just has the vibes. You know that one Castlevania Judgment stage I was showing you earlier with the acid pits? Yeah, Mortal Kombat just feels like that. Acid pits, evil force, spike pits beneath you. The world of Mortal Kombat wants you dead, and it does not hesitate to let you know. The main selling of Mortal Kombat, if you ask anybody picking up the game, is body horror. Less in the sense of what horrors can manifest within or as a result of the body, and more in what are the horrors that can be done to your body. This game got us the ESRB. This game is one of the reasons that we have a modern game rating system. So it only makes sense that each entry after the first escalated the violence. Each game, except for the bad ones in Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, they ramp up the violence in very different ways. and that gives way to darker tones. The first game is very influenced by martial arts action movies, obviously. Johnny Cage is just Jean-Claude Van Damme. It was even planned for Jean-Claude Van Damme to show up, but he couldn't, so they got Johnny Cage instead. They made Johnny Cage instead. Even then, there was this element in the stages where there was tension. If you lose, you get an uppercut into a punji pit. Welcome to Outworld. But already into the second game, we have monstrous trees and forests, dungeons with an acid pit. Noob Saibot is here. Noob Saibot. The original Sub-Zero you killed in the first tournament as Scorpion, and he's honestly kinda creepy. Baraka is from a race that looks like they would come out of a creature feature with arm blades and gnashing teeth to match. Reptile started off as just another Technicolor ninja, and then he became more monstrous as the entries continued on. That's not even referring down the line to Scarlet, who uses hemokinesis, a lot of blood magic today. Scorpion, the most iconic character of Mortal Kombat, who is literally a vengeful spirit, looking to avenge his clan. Ermac, who is a collection of souls. Meat is a man who doesn't have skin. We haven't even started talking about the actual cameos. Mortal Kombat 9 featured Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. X, which I'm going to refer to as 10, had Jason Voorhees, the Xenomorph, Leatherface, and the Predator. 11 has Spawn, and I will make an argument that Terminator is horror. And Mortal Kombat 1, that is to say, Mortal Kombat 12, has Ghostface just released and is planning to get the T-1000. These are big names in horror. All of these characters are here in this arena of blood and guts and convoluted timelines, and there is blood. ESRB, remember? Mortal Kombat has so many controversies over its existence for both outside and inside the house. From reports of violence done by young children trying to imitate the game, which many can be falsified, to an in-studio report that looking at all of the horrible, nasty, bloody, grotesque footage as a way to design fatalities has left some people with trauma and a lot of sleepless nights. Mortal Kombat to me is horror, but not in an exciting or thrilling or psychological way. It is grindhouse. It is gross, it is messy, and it is bloody, if nothing else. Alright, let's talk about it. The elephant in the room. The last game I want to talk about with you is one of the most fabled games when it comes to horror and fighting games. Despite there being only a 4-year period where there were actually new Darkstalkers games, this thing cemented itself as one of Capcom's best games out there. What was essentially Universal Monsters the fighting game, Darkstalkers is known for its iconic characters, by which I mean just Morrigan, its personality, and its gameplay. This game is fundamentally a horror fighting game. The characters are monsters based off of old films, fairy tales, and legends. The stages are eerie, and blood spurts out of your characters when they get hit for that real grindhouse feel to it. And I haven't really played it. Well, that's not true. I've played a bit of Vampire Savior, the last mainline game in the series. I like it. I enjoy the combos. I like how the game values offense and has features in place that reward you for it. I like how the game is just searching for a reason to give you meter so you can do your super. It's fun, but I don't know much about it, considering it's been functionally dead for 2 decades now. I know someone who does, though. Thorgy's Arcade is a YouTube channel that is devoted to making videos about video games, run by, and I quote, Aaron Thorgy, whatever the hell you want to call me. From the Build a Roster series all the way up to Let's Make a Sequel, I genuinely enjoy his videos. I got a chance to meet him at EVO, but I most enjoy his fighting game retrospectives. And after watching his Darkstalkers retrospective and hearing about the history of the game and how the legacy of it bled into other franchises, I had a thought. I might not know a lot about Darkstalkers, but Thorgy does. So I shot him a short email asking if I could pick his brain about this franchise for a project, and also a little bit about horror in general. And he was nice enough to indulge. I had 5 questions regarding him and his knowledge. I wanted to know what kind of games he had played growing up, what his experience with horror was, what got him into Darkstalkers, if he ever noticed a dip in quality in the games, and what killed the franchise, and if he felt it die. Sometimes you can watch a franchise die right before your eyes. I want to see if that's what he had felt. I had 2 queries also catered to his opinion, mainly if he thinks there's still a chance for horror in fighting games, and if Darkstalkers is dead. So Thorgy played a lot of platforms as a kid, and RPGs as a teenager, but he consistently played fighting games growing up. From hitting the cabinets at the arcades, upwards to renting them at video stores, and then playing them with friends at college. Okay, that's number 1. For number 2, he wrote back that he loved monsters as a kid, especially the Universal Pictures monsters, but didn't get into horror movies until middle school, where his friend showed him Evil Dead. Good choice. That got him exploring more of the subgenres of horror until he, quote, could handle the heavier stuff and learn to love each corner of the horror world. Good, we've got a baseline. Let's get into the meat of it. What got him into Darkstalkers? Well, for him, it was the characters. Like Thorgy said, he loved Universal Monsters as a kid, and not to go on a tangent here, but that is immediately a good thing for a fighting game. Have striking character designs with interesting outfits, good color schemes, or fun personalities that you can feel through the screen. And a roster full of monsters works well, although Thorgy said he didn't recognize it as horror at the time. He more just saw it as monsters. Anyway, he mentioned that one of the things that stood out to him was how fast the game actually moved, and how much it prioritized just getting in there and messing the other guy up. And that's not to speak on the animations and exaggerated sprites. And I think that's true for Darkstalkers. For as dark, violent, and as sexually charged as it was, thanks Morgan, it was also goofy. Characters would have their eyeballs pop out of their heads when they got grabbed. When they got electrified, you could see their bones, like in the cartoony electrocution manner. That's a labor of love on the developer's part, and it paid off. Thorgy noted that there wasn't really any downturn in quality throughout the franchise, especially considering there were only 3 entries. There was a clear idea of what to do with Darkstalkers, and that idea just got refined over all 3 games and their re-releases. Oh, the re-releases. Alright, let's talk about what killed Darkstalkers. I'm gonna quote Thorgy directly for this one. The end of Darkstalkers came in 2 different ways. The first end was with the death of the arcades, which led to a massive decline in 2D fighters, which many people refer to as the dark age of fighting games. I didn't really feel anything about Darkstalkers specifically ending at that time, because I was more torn up about all the 2D fighters that were gone. It's like, if every store on a street closes down, yes, you'll feel bad about your favorite store closing, but you'll also look around and think, oh, everything is gone. This is horrible. However, the second time Darkstalkers ended was before it could even start again. When 2D fighters were coming back at the start of the 2000s, there was a lot of talk about Darkstalkers coming back, but instead we got another re-release, which didn't do that well. And that pretty much cemented that it wasn't coming back. And that one actually hurt, because it felt like in this new era, any old title could come back, but instead, it now felt like all hope of this series returning was just gone. So yeah, I felt a specific pain for the series at that time, and now felt like it really wasn't happening. When people say the dark age of fighting games, commonly what they refer to is Capcom. Capcom had a hard run of it lately, from using outdated hardware to just generally not keeping up with the times. Street Fighter 3, despite being a classic nowadays, was not well received on drop. and it flopped hard. And Darkstalkers, it kind of became a casualty of Capcom shifting its focus from fighting games. With the arcades drying up, it made sense. Sure enough, at San Diego Comic-Con in 2011, Yoshinori Ono, who was running Street Fighter at the time and spearheaded Street Fighter's return, and had been pushing for a new Darkstalkers game, against the wishes of the big boss at the time, Keiji Inafune, unveiled a trailer for what people think was supposed to be a brand new Darkstalkers game. It even had the closing tagline, "Darkstalkers are not dead." Ono even went on record saying that he wishes it got made. That post still exists on Twitter. This eventually turned into that re-release to see if people were even interested, which came out a few months later, after a bunch of other re-releases to see if people were interested. There's the potential that Street Fighter Cross Tekken's failure had some factor in it being a re-release and not a brand new game, but that's a bit of speculation. Even now, Takayuki Nakayama, the director of Street Fighter VI, has hinted that a new Darkstalkers game was in development in 2013, but got cancelled. Watching something you love die in front of you is sad. And when that something is indicative of a bigger whole that is dying, then that makes for a more crushing defeat. I can only imagine watching Darkstalkers die and not thinking, oh man, that's the end of Darkstalkers, but thinking, this is the end of a scene that I've grown up with. This is the end of arcades as I know it. I can only imagine watching that scene die. The last two questions were purely hope spots. I just needed an opinion. These last two I'm going to read you again because I don't know if I can paraphrase them and do them justice at the same time. And for the sake of having a thematically fitting conclusion, I want to answer the last question first. Question 7. Is Darkstalkers dead? My answer is going to sound like a swerve, but I'd say it's dead until someone brings it back. Thankfully, the characters stick in people's minds. In fact, I see more love for them today than I saw 10, 15 years ago. I even see so many people who never played these games wanting them to return. And the fighting game scene now is so alive, pretty much any series could return. But I don't think any of the higher-ups at Capcom care to bring it back. So, if it was going to return, we'd need someone in there who wanted to revive it. And at that moment, I don't think there is anyone willing to do that. So, it is dead, unless someone at Capcom says otherwise someday. Alright, I'll take it. Keep hope alive. What about number 6? Is there a place for horror in fighting games? Oh, certainly. There's always been a certain overlap between horror and fighting games. Mortal Kombat still leans heavily on horror elements, not just with its violence and gore, but also using several monster tropes and even horror movie guest stars. And then games like Guilty Gear and Killer Instinct might not seem like they're connected to horror, but you look at the cast and it's full of vampires and witches and other monsters. I think fighting game fans just love big personalities. And monsters for many people were up there with superheroes as those first big personalities that stuck in our minds. It felt interesting, nice even, to get this knowledge about a series that I had played only through things like Fightcade and random collections and demos at GameStops as a child. To see something that someone has grown up with. There it is. Sorry, I had a train of thought. I remember. Terrordrome 2, Reign of Legends is a game that exists, by the way. It is out on Steam for $19.99, it has mostly positive reviews. It's got some original characters this time around. I've seen some gameplay of it. Looks alright. Don't know if I'll get it. But it's nice to know it even exists. You know what I mean? It's nice to just have the option. And again, Omen of Sorrow is something that exists. In fact, in my hometown, sorry, grabbing my quarters there. In my hometown, we have a round 1, basically bowling alley and arcade fusion thing. It's like if I had respect for Dave and Buster's. But they have a bunch of cabinets, Street Fighter, SNK multi-cabinet, and on that thing, they have Omen of Sorrow. So, I guess I don't have an excuse to not play it anymore. And now that I think about it, Terrordrome, while not my favorite game on Earth, definitely controls well enough that I can recommend it to other people. And it's fun. I don't know if I'll ever play it again, but it's nice to know that there's the option. It's really nice to know that I have the option to play OG Terrordrome again, because I didn't think that existed for the longest time. At all. Playing as Candyman while fighting Pinhead, that... You guys understand how that's crazy, right? That's not a thing that I could possibly think of as a child, because I didn't watch horror movies as a kid, despite what my dad may tell you otherwise, but that is a weird combination for a fighting game. Licensed characters. I mean, good thing it's a fan game. And it's wild that so much of this stuff is just here, available. It's odd to me to think that there was a point where I was worried, oh, I'm never going to see another horror-themed fighting game. So much space-themed fighting games, so many fantasy themes, so many martial arts tournaments. It's bizarre to me that I didn't think that there wouldn't be something to fill the niche. I should get ready a little bit faster. I have to go to a tournament down at All Systems Go. Same place I went for my bracket in Terrordrome. I doubt that'll be the mystery game this week, but you never know. On the subject of All Systems Go. Actually, you see, they have this one cabinet. This one big cabinet. It's an esports bar, I should make that clear, but they have this big cabinet. A Marvel vs. Capcom machine, or so it's labeled. It's not really. It's an emulating thing. It's a big cabinet with a bunch of games from different eras loaded on. PS2, they've got an option for PS3. They've got old school Neo Geo hardware. They've got a bunch of stuff, is my point. And one of the games they have on there, Darkstalkers. I don't know which one, but they do have it. And sometimes I'll go over and I'll just bash on it. And Morrigan's popularity extends outside of Darkstalkers. She's in a bunch of the Marvel vs. Capcom, a bunch of the Capcom crossover games. Capcom doesn't want to necessarily make a new Darkstalkers, but they haven't forgotten her. They haven't forgotten Darkstalkers. I don't think anyone's forgotten about horror and fighting games. I think it was anxiety. I think what I had was not a rational fear, but a sense of, now that I recognize this, now that I recognize that these exist, and that this niche is fulfilled, what happens if it runs out? But people will always make more fighting games. They just will. And even then, I can always revisit the classics. And Darkstalkers might be dead, but you never know. Horror is built on a lot of things. Sometimes violence, sometimes dramaticism. But there's one thing you can always guarantee on. This extends to everything. Especially fighting games. Dead franchises come back. Friday the 13th just got out of legal hell. Come on. No matter what, something you love, and the way that you love it, will show up for one last scare at the end.